Welcome to the Mom as Well podcast, where we are digging deep into the gifts and the gaps of foster and adoptive parenting. I'm Tara Hutton, and I'm glad you're here.
Mama's Well.
Yes, she is. Well, here we are, and as promised, I am back with my, now I'm going to call her a dear friend, but Dr. Bogardus. Thank you for coming back. We had a great lunch. We sat outside. Like I said, the weather is beautiful here, and she has, if you didn't catch what would be last week's episode, we had Jen Bogardus, Dr. Bogardus, on, and she talked about international adoption and bringing her two children home and the trauma that they've experienced, the extreme medical needs that they've experienced, and how she's dealt with the grief of that. And so if you missed that one, I would hit pause right here and go back and listen. It was a beautiful story. And I asked her to stay, and we're going to continue that story because she is a doctor of physical therapy, a professor and of that, and has a lot to share in that regard, as well as how her own journey has shifted the way that she views her practice and her teaching and with her students. And so I'm excited for you to hear what she has to share. But before we start, Jen, thank you for staying today.
Yes, I'm excited.
I'm glad that you did. We had it was a great lunch. We continue to connect even more deeply. But at lunch, you shared a story with me. And again, if you missed last week's episode, you got to go hear about little Mia. Because this story that she shared with me at lunch, I said, I want you to share that story. It was so beautiful. So if you don't know who Mia is, go back. But as a cliff note, it's their daughter that they adopted from China. Mm-hmm. Tell the audience that story. You know what I'm talking about?
I do.
Okay.
I do.
That I just want to kick us off there. We're not talking about physical therapy yet, but beautiful story that I don't want it to go untold. And your precious friend
Yes.
Okay, I'm not going to say anything else.
Yes.
Your turn. You're on. Tell the story.
So prior to bringing her home, I was looking for continued confirmation that we were on the right path because, as we talked before, her medical needs were much greater than what we had sort of agreed as a couple we were ready to deal with. Mm-hmm. And so I kept asking for this big sign, and I was very purposeful in asking that it be big and blatant and like neon. I needed not subtle. If you haven't guessed, I don't do subtle all that well.
I love that about you.
So I needed it to be glaring. Anyway, I was joining all these Facebook groups and to try to figure out what was going on with her heart and how other moms had dealt with this that had brought home children from China especially. And I was on this one heart group and happened to connect just randomly to this one mom. And she kind of reached out to me, and we visited back and forth, and she was willing to give me some steps to do and so on and so forth. And then we found out that we were adopting children kind of at the same time. We were on the same timeline. And as we talked more, we both found out that we were both going to Shanghai. And Shanghai has one orphanage, and there are well over 600 children in that orphanage. So it's a huge, huge place. And so in our conversation, so this is all over Facebook and texting, and she had said to me, do you have a picture of her? And we're very private about that until a certain amount of paperwork is done. But I was like, and I sent her this picture, and I went to bed that night. And then the next morning, when I woke up, there was a message from her, and she said, "You will never believe this." And then up pops this picture, and there's our daughter. There's Mia sitting in this picture. And she said, "I went on an advocacy trip last fall, and that's where we met our son. I went back through my things after we were talking, and your daughter and my son are sitting right next to each other in this picture." And I just tears streamed down my face because I was like, I got it. I heard you.
Wow.
There's my big neon sign.
Yeah.
It was a synchronicity that was so powerful, you could not possibly deny that it was orchestrated by something much bigger than than randomness, right?
Yeah.
It was that felt very purposeful.
Yeah.
And so I try very hard, and I'm still connected to that friend, and I try very hard when I am in the middle of hard struggle to come back to that anchor.
Yeah.
Because I really believe that was my big yes.
Yeah.
And so anytime that I'm doubting this path, I try really hard to go back to that.
Yeah. I think that's
that blessing that
such
was
a powerful. When she told me that at lunch, I just kind of, my jaw just dropped. I didn't really have any words for you.
It's a crazy story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't even have any words. And I love that. And we talked about this. Like, I love that is an anchor. Mm-hmm. I always say, when I talk to new foster parents, through the agency, they're asking questions, and I always say, know your why. Mm-hmm. Because if you know your why, then when the crazy goes down, when the fear comes in, when the anxiety, the overwhelm kicks in, you got to go back to your why. Mm-hmm. And when you're solid on your why, it can take you through a lot.
Yeah, agreed.
And so that is a beautiful, beautiful story.
Mm-hmm.
And so thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. So I asked you to stay because I want, you talked about in the first episode, you talked about how raising your two own children who have come from very traumatic starts in their lives had shifted your view of how you treat your patients, how you teach your students, about physical therapy, right? Physical therapy, PT, that's what I always heard it called. And I've never ever had physical therapy. You hear about.
We're lucky.
Yeah. I've never broken a bone. I've never had a surgery that required it. I've never had physical therapy. So I know very little about it. I know that it's very painful after someone has a surgery or something. That's kind of the things I know.
Yeah.
And so I would love you, because I might not be the only one here, because could you just start with just like this super brief explanation of like, what is it? Who requires it? Why do you give us the PT 101.
Okay.
In about a few minutes course.
Okay. So physical therapists at this point in time have doctoral degrees. So we have a clinical doctorate.
Okay.
So what that means in terms of schooling is that our students go through 4 years of a bachelor's degree, usually in some type of science-related course, kinesiology, exercise science, something like that. And then they apply to a graduate school, a doctorate program, and then they go through 3 years of graduate work and then pass a board exam. Very similar to nurses and doctors and dentists. And, we have a board exam that licenses us in the state that we're going to practice in. And in the state of Texas, physical therapists can function independent of a doctor's prescription for a certain period of time. But we usually we are required to have a doctor's script after a certain period of time of treating a patient. But you can absolutely see a PT without seeing a physician first, which I think is an important piece, because we're able to skip some of the time frame that it would take for a patient to get to us. And I think at this point in time, PTs are also trying to, I would love to see a time when, for example, you have your own PT just as you would your own primary care physician or your own dentist, right? Yeah. When something comes up in your body that you need to work on, that you go see your PT. Wow. And I think that's what our profession is striving for. But we are able to treat all types of conditions, which is what I really love. So we treat anywhere from geriatric patients all the way down to brand new newborns. We treat musculoskeletal conditions, so anything from muscular issues and fractures and trauma from a car accident to neurological issues like stroke, brain damage, spinal cord injury, those types of things. And we work in a tremendous amount of settings. So we can work in hospitals, we work in subacute rehabs, we can work in school districts, we work in private outpatient clinics. There's a huge variety of places that we're able to offer treatment. So I've always been really, really thankful that's the profession I've chosen.
You answered a question that I've often had is, do you have to go to a doctor first? Like if I suspect, maybe my daughter's foot turns in a little bit or whatever, would that be an avenue to research?
Yes, and you absolutely could see a PT first, and that is something that we're trained in posture and to be able to look at foot positioning, and then we have training to be able to help correct that foot positioning, whether it's through bracing or exercise or stretching, or there's lots and lots of different treatment techniques that we have.
That's great. That's interesting. Okay, that's perfect. Everybody got that? We got our 101. So now we at least know what you do at some level, but you do. I mean, that was the 101. So let's go to the 102. And then 103 is how you've shifted, I think.
Okay.
I don't know, I'm making this up. But so tell us what currently your position.
So I kind of have my primary work is that I'm a professor at Texas Women's University in Houston, and I teach in that doctoral program. My specific area of expertise is in the psychological component of healing. So that's where I spend all my time reading. That's what I spend all my time researching. That's the content that I teach. So I am really deeply embedded in how your mind is connected to your healing process, and how important that is for physical therapists to be able to relate to both of those things in order to really empower a patient to heal. And I think that's an important distinction, that we are not the ones fixing anything. I think that we have a really great academic background to be able to help empower patients to heal themselves, because your body is really built to do that, right? It really is meant to take care of itself. And my feeling is that it is now really important that since we understand the physical body so well, that we start to really connect how your mind and how your spirit impact your body. And that has become a really big focus of mine, particularly since I brought my two little children home, because the physical impacts of some of the psychological things that have happened for them are glaringly obvious to me now. And that wasn't such a big part of my understanding prior to bringing them home. And even, you and I have talked before about their trauma becoming my trauma. And even though I wasn't in their situations, I have experienced a lot of physical stuff secondary to the emotional impact of parenting a child from a hard place. So that has really shifted the way that I think and the way that I teach and the perspective that I have about physical therapy in general. It's totally tweaked my own personal practice into a very different place. My husband teases that when I treat now, he always wants to know if I wear my witch hat, because because there's this emotional psychological component that I have built into the way that I practice. But I think it's working. So I think it's really important. I think what his example demonstrates is that it's not everybody is ready to understand or know how deep that connection is. But I think the entire medical world is evolving into a much more holistic view of how we treat people.
I hope so.
I hope so too.
Yeah, I hope so. And I'm thrilled that you are not only doing this, have this mindset in your own life, in your own family, in your own practice, but that you are the person that future doctors are listening to, and you're putting information in their head to ponder and to think about. Like, how do our emotions, how does our past experiences, our losses, our hurts, our wounds, our trauma, how does that play out in our body? Can you give us you said that you have, and so this light, you were already in this world, or did it really flip on when your children came home? I mean, how did that?
Well, I think I've always been very interested and open to that information, but there was certainly a time in my profession that I was very objective. And if it wasn't glaringly obvious from a research perspective, if you couldn't measure it very distinctively, I was not going to practice that way. Yeah. So I feel like I was much more closed-minded as a younger PT and as a younger mom, and that makes sense to me.
Well, also scientifically speaking, many science, is that like your left brain? Like what, like,
Yeah.
is that right?
Yes.
So like that mind, that type of person, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm labeling it all wrong.
Yeah.
But they do want to see things. My son, he's in medical school, like black
Right.
and white.
That's right.
Proof or not,
Right.
you know?
Right.
Wow.
But I think now if you start to talk to younger medical professionals as they get out into the clinic, it's very different the way we teach students in the classroom. We have to give them yes or no answers to many things because we're trying to teach them a baseline and a platform. And that's what we tell them. We're giving you a baseline, but the real world is really much grayer than this. And I am blessed to be able to teach in the way that I like to teach, that I'm able to at least expose them to the possibility that there's a lot of gray and that it empowers them to work with the gray and combine it with their other tools and their other techniques that they're doing.
Well, and there's one of my favorite words in the last few years is curiosity. And I think that and then there's another C word that's kind of a counterpart to that. It's certainty. And it's like those kind of like, when you have such certainty about one thing, you're not really open to curiosity.
Right.
But curiosity is like where we learn. Like that's where we discover, where we grow in curiosity. Certainty, even my body kind of clenches when I say certainty versus curiosity. It just kind of opens. So it's interesting.
Yeah. And our kids are the best examples of that, right? Curiosity is what drives them to develop, which is one of the things that when they don't have the same opportunities as other children, curiosity cannot be the motivator to develop.
Survival becomes the motivator.
Exactly right, which is very detrimental to typical development in a child.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. I got us off track. Not really.
No,
We're
actually,
supposed to be.
Yeah,
Huh?
exactly.
So, okay. So back to your question, I asked the question, where were you, was this something new that came on after, but you said, no, I was open to it, but definitely when the kids came home and you're like, you're not just talking with a mom in your clinic, you are experiencing these things. What kinds of things did you see? Like what kinds of things, how are you making these connections in your brain?
So there are really two things that I think I understood much better once my kids came home. One of them was how their physical environment really impacts their ability to grow and develop, and that's one avenue. But then the other piece, which is much harder to see, is the way that trauma impacts their bodies and then changes their ability to grow and develop. So, for example, and I can speak most authentically from understanding the international adoption world and that circumstance. But for example, when children are institutionalized, like both of my children were, they are in big rooms with several children and a couple of caregivers. And that changes the entire environment. It's very different than obviously like our three boys, right? Each of us have three biological boys. And that was very different, right? So I can't speak to what exact traumas any of the children in that institution may have, but it's pretty well known that traumas exist in those environments. The one that we do know exists is the most raw trauma of abandonment, right? So even a child who was, Mia was, without getting too deep into her particular story.
And you could speak that for pretty much anyone in that facility.
Yes, exactly. She was abandoned when she was 2 months old. So, and she was dying when she was abandoned. She was very, very sick. And she was hospitalized then for almost 9 months, 10 months. So if we talk about trauma that she would have faced at that time, there's the detachment from her parents and what she knew for 2 months. There is the trauma of being in a hospital where she is intubated and there's sounds going off all around her and nobody's touching her or holding her. In fact, every input that she's getting, whether it be a needle or it's all noxious, right? It's all harsh things. That creates a fear response, right? So fear responses happen in the posterior part of your brain, and it's the first part of your brain that develops. And its sole purpose is simply to keep you safe. It has no other ability to do anything else other than keep you safe. So it kicks on parasympathetic or sympathetic nervous system depending on what the situation is. The rest of her brain wasn't well developed yet. So the part that's online and that now is overactivated is her hindbrain. And it is just reading, it's threat, trauma over and over again. So with that part of her brain lit up and online, nothing else can start to wire together appropriately as far as development goes. So she has that. Now she also has the fact that she's lying in a hospital bed for the first year of her life and not sitting up and playing with toys and being curious and exploring, right? So she doesn't have the environment to develop naturally and go through the normal developmental phases. And then we come along at this very tender time in her life when she's now just forming some solid attachments with nannies in her where she's living, and we change her name and her clothes and her food and her home. And we put her on an airplane for the first time, and she's driving in cars that she's never been in, and we bring her to this new country, and she's got new siblings, and nobody looks like her, and there's this whole new transitional trauma that happens again. And so that part of her brain fires again, and development is stunted or held off because her brain is trying to protect her body.
Yeah.
And so what that looks like in terms of physical effects is that there are major delays in development. So the normal developmental milestones that a child would go through become very late. She didn't walk until she was almost 3 years old. So if you can't walk, you can't explore, right? You can't figure things out. You can't be curious about things. And those are the things that create connections in your brain. The other major piece that I think is really important to talk about is the impact of the lack of attachment that she had, because that has manifested into some very real physical behaviors for her, and I think physical changes in her own body that we work on. So when a child is born and a mother releases all this oxytocin, there are natural chemicals that help those two people bond to one another, and it's super powerful. And so when that closeness does not exist, then a child doesn't feel safe, right? It all comes back to feeling safe and secure. And when that doesn't happen and those normal attachments of safety are not present, again, the same thing, the part of her brain that learns motor patterns and learns to discriminate colors and all that stuff is not available to her to be making connections because it's constantly flooded with, I'm not safe, I'm not secure, nobody's paying attention to me, nobody's taking care of me. Well, that doesn't just go away, and that doesn't just flip off once that's been ingrained as a pattern for a really long time. So by the time she gets to me, she has no trust in attachment at all. And that develops into some really strange developmental patterns about the way, just her coping mechanisms, and even her strength, like even something like her core strength. So you and I have talked about breath before, right, and how important breathing is. Well, Mia, because she has such high anxiety, breathes in the top of her body constantly. So her whole abdomen,
as opposed to her
abs, right? So she breathes way up high here.
Making me want to take a deep breath.
I know.
Let my belly rise.
I know. But it's constant for her, and you don't work abdominal muscles.
Why? I've heard this, but I want to hear your beautiful. You're such great. You explain things so well. So why is that? What would make a child breathe from here versus like a normal children belly breathe, right? Not normal, but a child who has had a stable first few years, they're going to breathe from their belly. Is that what you're saying?
They'll breathe more normally and they'll breathe more deeply. So if you had an anxiety attack or a panic attack, everything comes up really high, and that's a sympathetic response, right? That's your nervous system turning on cortisol, shutting down all the relaxation stuff, and shunting blood to the areas of your body where it feels like okay, if I'm going to get away or I'm going to run or I'm going to hide.
Is that why your lungs fill?
Yes,
you have to run?
or that's why you breathe fast.
Yeah.
Right. We start taking in more oxygen so that we can get away. It's a beautiful system.
Yeah.
Right. It is beautiful, but it's beautiful if there's a bear.
Yeah.
Right.
But our children, ourselves, myself included, have found myself stuck, for lack of a better word, in that response.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's like someone flips on the switch because something's really bad, but then even after the bad goes away, the switch doesn't get flipped back off. And if it does, it takes very, very little to flip it back on again. It doesn't take the same intensity of a situation in order to flip that response back on.
Because they're prepared.
Because
they're vigilant.
They're not going to their brain is not going to let anything happen to them, and
Yeah.
they're not going to be unprepared again. Yeah. So she's very stuck in that very high anxiety state. So the changes in the way that manifests in the body is that there are breathing changes. So she doesn't strengthen her abdominals normally like you and I would by taking big deep breaths and because she breathes up high all the time. There are other, because she's also then, she doesn't want to explore as much. It's taken a lot for us to get her to feel safe to go out and do things. And some of that's that she didn't have the environment and didn't have the exposure, but some of it's just trust. And so those opportunities then create a much weaker system for her in general than a child who is in a normal environment. But cortisol itself is not healthy on a chronic. We know that, right?
Yeah.
Science knows that definitively,
Yeah.
that it's very damaging to body tissue to have cortisol running through your system all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for many of these children whose systems are flipped on, for lack of a better term, have cortisol just coursing through their body constantly. And so it depresses their immune system. You may find that they have less resilience to viruses or to illnesses. They might have more pain. I mean, my daughter will actually, if she throws a tantrum and she's screaming, she will actually scream, "Ow." So she screams that there's pain, and she'll tell me, "I have stomach pain. My head hurts, my stomach hurts," and I bet it does.
Yeah.
Because she physically manifests physical pain.
Yeah.
Because the emotional ache is so big,
Yeah.
it actually pushes its way into her cells, right? Into her tissues, and that's how
Wow.
it manifests for her.
Yeah.
Which is I don't want to say it's an abnormal behavior. It's not for what she's been through, but it's very different than the other 7-year-old in my house who gets mad and, yells and tells me I'm going to run away from home today.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
A very typical,
Yeah.
right. And then he's over it.
Yeah.
His flexibility to recover is much greater.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
I get that. So what can we do? So what would you do? Like, say I bring my daughter to see you and I tell you, obviously you're going to ask her story, right? You're going to want to know about her first few years of life or whatever. Like, what would you do? I mean, how do you integrate that? Like, I get the awareness, but then what do we do with that?
Well, I think some of the things that are easy for people to start with are the physical things that they can see and that they can deal with.
Yeah.
So,
because that's what I would bring her. Like,
right.
I wouldn't necessarily put 2 and 2 together. Like, I'm a proponent for all of our healthcare system to be trauma informed. Like, if a physical therapist gets this, like, right, well, what about the cardiologist?
Right.
Well, what about the neurologist? Well, what about just the basic pediatrician? Like, all of these things, if there was it's not being taught in our schools, I don't think. I don't know.
Not in this way.
Yeah.
No.
So my point is, that's great that we're aware. Now what? Like, what do we, how can we as parents, how do you as a doctor, how do you handle all these? What do you do? How do you help? You said notice, I interrupted, I think. You said the physical things is what we notice. Like,
right.
I wouldn't necessarily bring her, like, say her foot turns in a little bit.
Right.
Maybe related, maybe not related. Maybe genetic, maybe not. I don't know.
Right. Well, let me give you an example, a really classic example of like a physical thing that changed Mia's development.
Okay.
And, my littlest guy is a whole different story because he's not neurotypical, but Mia is.
Okay.
So when we first brought Mia home, she had never, ever, ever walked without shoes. ever.
Okay.
So her bare feet never touched a different texture. So the first time we ever took her shoes off outside and she went in the grass, she fell and she screamed. It was a terrible feeling to her.
Wow.
So
Can't even imagine having never.
at 3 years old, right? So the problem with that, other than just that she's not sensitized to the texture of the grass, the problem with that is that one of the ways that we develop balance and core strength and the ability to move on to the next developmental stage is to take in information through your feet. Right? You take tons of information, proprioceptive information, and kinesthetic information, and sensory input through your feet, and your brain organizes that and uses it to be able to make you flexible when you walk and when you're standing on different surfaces. That's the reason that when we go from the grass to the pavement, for example, we don't fall over because our bodies are used to integrating those changes in the ground and in the surface that we're working on or walking on. When you don't have something like that kind of input at an early age, and that circuit is not built, the things that come after that, like really good core strength or the ability to run, for example, or alternating arms and legs, which takes core strength and balance, those things don't happen. So she was very developmentally delayed, and one of the big reasons was because she had no input in her feet.
Wow.
Right?
So what'd you do?
So for her, we just took her shoes off all the time. And
Did she fight you on it?
She did.
Okay.
So we would just do it very, very gently. And I would take my shoes off and I would
Yeah.
sit next to her and we would just touch the grass. And when we would
Yeah.
sit by the pool and we would just tap the pool with our
Yeah.
toes or,
Yeah.
we would just give her different opportunities to experience different sensation in her feet. But it wouldn't be common to think that, oh, well, the sensation coming in her feet is why her belly's not strong or why she can't climb up the jungle gym. But that's kind of the first thing that happens for kids.
Great example.
Yeah. So I think as parents, recognizing, particularly when we have children who have come from an environment that is not at all like ours,
Yeah.
kind of thinking through the early opportunities that they may have missed that we just need to expose them to, right? Their developmental age is not the same as their chronological age.
Yeah.
So going back to
I think we're told that, but I don't think we really quite get the vastness of that, like how huge that is.
Yeah, it's particularly at that age,
Yeah.
when they're little, right? They've only had a certain amount of time to grow and develop. So if they are developmentally a year behind, well, a 4-year-old is really different than a 3-year-old.
Yeah.
And being able to kind of meet them where they're at and give them those opportunities is important. But as a PT, what I would do is I would look at their developmental milestones and try to figure out what their developmental age really is. And I think sometimes explaining that to a parent, being able to say, well, I know that they're 5,
Yeah.
but their body and their brain is not 5.
Yeah.
They're really 3.
Yeah.
And so in order to move forward, you can't skip steps.
Yeah.
You've got to go back to where they are.
You can't skip steps.
You really can't skip
That's
steps.
important.
Your brain is wired to go through this pretty typical pattern of development. So when there are gaps in that development, the way to get through it is really to go back to where we got stuck.
Yeah.
Same thing with trauma.
Right.
A child might be developing very typically, until they're 3, have a major trauma, and then they regress and they're stuck. And we never really, parents will say, well, I don't understand. We stopped developing.
Yeah.
And outside of some type of disease or damage,
Yeah. A traumatic event caused.
right, a traumatic event, it really takes going back to the time that traumatic event happened and working forward from there in terms of development.
Wow.
And sometimes just helping somebody understand that, they're like, oh, okay. So it's okay for me to go back to these steps
To
or back
hold her
to
or
hold
rock her or
right.
let her play with a bottle
Right.
or
And
whatever.
I can easily say that as a PT.
Yeah.
As a mom,
Yes.
I have to work really hard
Yeah.
to pull myself back and remember that she is not
Yeah.
developmentally 7.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's really good. And I know you and I have talked about that. It is hard. It is not the same. As a teacher, I had a struggle with, my girls go to school only 3 days on campus. And then the other 2 days, and this is not a COVID pandemic thing. This was just the design of the school, and then at home on 2 days. Well, I have I have reading specialization. Like I have all my training is in teaching kids to read, and really struggled with my daughter in the push, rejection. When she gets afraid, when she feels like she can't do something or whatever, just pushing, just kind of like what we talked about in the earlier episode. It's much different to teach a child to read that you don't have these attachments with. You know, like if I sat down with your daughter, we would probably work beautifully together.
I'm sure you would.
And vice versa, right? But there's just something in me that can rise up that's like, why is she doing this? What's wrong with that? And I run down this whole rabbit trail of, and I'm sure it's similar to you.
Yes,
like, why is she, if my daughter was regressing, you would simply give me, this is what's happening. But then something you could get triggered by that regression.
Absolutely.
Because
I am not the PT
why aren't you
for either
being a
of my
big girl?
kids.
That kind of thing.
Right.
Because somebody told us that at some point,
Yes.
down when we were that age or whatever. I mean, we go down that road. That's very real.
That's very real.
I struggle with it.
And I'm not the PT for either of my children.
Yeah, it's probably smart, huh?
I have many roles that I need to play for them, and that one is too hard for me
to do.
I
I want to ask you a question without getting you too off track, but I remember, early in my training, it was actually the training that Ana Valdez did. That I've had her on this show before, but when I left her training, it was a weekend training. I left her training. She talked about some different things that are really beneficial for our children, like spinning, climbing, all these different things. Well, on the way home, I had driven out of town, and we used to save, as foster parents, you get a stipend. And so we had saved the girls' checks in an account, right? And so on the way home, I have all this information in my head. I didn't understand it. I just knew, like, that's really good for them, right? And I passed the tree frog place, that sells the yellow, the whatever. And I knew what I was doing. I pulled smack dab in a thing. I looked at all the big concoctions on the grounds there. And the biggest one I could see, I'm like, I want that one. And I said, I bought it.
Yeah.
I used their money. Thank you, government. They bought for my girls, but I didn't really know why I was completely buying it. Do you think that because all I knew was that, and I do know one thing about my daughter is she loves to spin. And so she talked about some of this stuff. So I didn't exactly know what I was buying, but I knew we needed it. You know how sometimes you listen to your gut? Yeah. So it's been a good investment. And I joke about it because I always say this. Look what their checks bought, but that's theirs. That was in my mind. That was their money. That's right. Their big thing. That's right. So, but it has like a tire swing. It has 2 slides. It has a rock wall, swings, all kinds of stuff on it. It is awesome. But tell me what I'm giving them. You know what I mean? Tell me what that does for them, because I've been curious about that.
Yeah. So if we talk about it in terms of, for typical kids, you're giving them opportunity to move their body in different ways and to strengthen different areas of their body. But for kids who have trauma, their nervous systems often are very, very different. And we talked about some of their nervous system being on overdrive, right? And when a child's nervous system is overstimulated like that, they perceive and interpret input differently than you and I will. So sometimes what that might show up as in a child is hypersensitivity to certain touches or tags, or these shoes are too tight, or lots of physical. So the input feels really intense for them, even when it's not really that intense. But it's the way their nervous system is integrating
hair,
brushing teeth, things in and around their mouth.
And how come some days it's like not a big deal, but some days it isn't?
Well, it just depends on how heightened their nervous system is.
So that's not a...
There can some of it's about control.
No, but I like that you just said that. Thank you for that.
Yeah, they're absolutely, just like some days I can wear something other than yoga pants. Some days I can't.
That's right. Yeah.
But we have typically integrated nervous systems.
I'm going to make that the wisdom from the well card. Oh my gosh. Some days I just can't wear anything but yoga pants.
It's totally true.
I get it, but I just got like nailed what you just said in a beautiful way, not in a bad way, but you know, that is the case at our house. Like some days I can brush her hair. She's like, I'm so brave. It just doesn't hurt. And you can brush it. You can brush it, you know, or some days I can wear, she can wear a dress with a little teeny piece of elastic right here. And some days she just can't. And I go to this place of like, oh my gosh, you wore that 3 days ago and it was the best dress ever, you know, but what you just said is some days I can wear yoga pants or I could put on a pair of jeans and feel great.
Yeah.
And so, okay, that's a better example because I could wear yoga pants every day.
True.
But some days I could put on a pair of jeans and like feel fantastic.
Yeah.
Some days, whether my weight's changed or not, I just can't do it.
Right.
I want my pajama pants on.
Right. Because it draws your attention. Right? It's distracting for you. There's some kind of input that's pulling your attention away. And for kids with trauma, that feels like somebody's screaming at them because their nervous system is not integrated or desensitized in the same way that a normal nervous system can be integrated. So
that was worth a lot. How much did I pay you to do that? I got my money's worth.
No, I love being here with you. I love it. And even the spinning thing, you talked about spinning.
Yeah, let's go back to that. Sorry,
so you brought up a really good point because I think something that people would be interested in hearing more about is things like sensory integration disorder.
Okay.
And that's kind of what we're talking about, right? Where sensory input is not integrated in the nervous system in the same way that a typical nervous system would. And so a lot of times that comes out like them being very loud.
Yeah.
Yelling because they need to feel it actually vibrates their inner ear, right? So their body needs that vibration to feel it in order to sense it. For example, my little guy, now he is not neurotypical, but he's very undersensitized. So he seeks sensory input constantly by screaming, by yelling, by banging his head, by hitting himself in the chest. None of it is usually out of anger. It's an attempt to feel input coming into his body because his sensory system is it's like it's dulled out. Okay. Right? So that's an extreme. Yeah. That's a really extreme example.
I think our children are. I think the children of people who are listening, they're having these issues.
Yes.
So what do you do for your son? What can obviously they need to probably see a PT to help with that.
But PTs and OTs are great.
Okay, what can we do at home? What are some things? Obviously, compassion. What I just
like big deep breaths and compassion because the continuity of the continuousness of that demand and that need for a caregiver is really hard. So help when you can have it, but compassion for yourself in that. In how you deal with it and how you show up to deal with it, but also having some tools. So for example, like with my son, who is a screamer, and screaming is it's one of those triggers that I can't tolerate very well at all. Yeah. So we actually developed what we call his screaming spot. I mean, it is literally a tape square on the floor in the kitchen. So he's not separated. I can still see him, but he has to keep his butt in the screaming spot if he's going to scream. That's where he does it.
Where do you go? Or do you put noise canceling?
I do. Yeah. I sometimes I put in earplugs. I can still see him, so he's safe. But I can walk around. I can put him back in the screaming spot if he needs to be. But he is learning that if I do this behavior, I have to do it here.
Yeah.
This is like my safe place to do it. Sometimes for him, because he is so undersensitized, if we give him deep pressure, so I don't really do PT with him, but I will do like deep massage in his feet and his hands because it's calming for him.
Yeah. What about a weighted blanket? That seems like
he has a weighted blanket. Yep. I think that's a great idea.
So what does that, is that what the weighted blanket does?
Absolutely. It gives more input. It's deep pressure. So that the sensory system then, it's almost like you've got something that's vibrating really hard and you put some deep pressure over it and that vibration simmers. And it's kind of the same, it's kind of a weird example, but it's kind of the same principle.
I like a heavy blanket too. I don't have a true weighted blanket, but I have a heavy quilt.
Yes, it feels calming to you, right?
Very,
Yeah. And it's the same way. It's the same way with our kids.
So go to the spinning. I'm
Yeah.
taking you all over the place.
Yeah,
Sorry.
no, it's great. So spinning really has to do with your vestibular system.
Okay.
So your vestibular system is primarily located in your inner ear, and we have your vision, your inner ear, and your feet. Essentially, are the three inputs that combine to give you balance and let your body know where your head is in space and where your body is in space. And when that inner ear gets screwed up, we get dizzy. Right? That's what causes motion sickness. That's why people can't get on a roller coaster, because their inner ear is not able to regulate that really crazy abnormal movement. They can't integrate the information fast enough to be like, I'm okay.
Yeah.
And it causes this reaction. So very often for kids who have been in sort of these abnormal environments or have trauma, their vestibular systems don't develop typically either. And so they crave some of that input. And it's by spinning and turning upside down and doing all the things that our kids do. And they do somersaults down the hill, and you're like, ugh.
Yes, she loves that.
It's strengthening their vestibular system.
Yeah.
So doing those things is not only good for their vestibular system, but it's also, it's calming for their kind of chaotic nervous system. And so we often will tell parents who have a child who is really physically kind of out of control, or who has a lot of energy, children who are on the autistic spectrum, or children who might be diagnosed with ADHD, things like spinning and swinging and this back and forth movement is really calming to their nervous system. So it's like a non-pharmaceutical way to help regulate and just
I think that's probably what she said in that thing. She's like, yeah, spinning's going to help calm them down. I'm like, where's the biggest spinner? Give me the biggest one you got. Yeah. We got a tire swing.
Yeah, it's really true. But the reason spinning, that you and I don't like spinning, is because our vestibular systems are mature.
Yes.
Right?
My husband does not like spinning at all.
Nope.
I like it a little more than him. So mine might not be. I might not be as mature as him. Go figure. I remember I figured out she liked spinning because we went to, now don't judge me on this, I learned, but we took them to Disney World. It was horrible.
Listen.
We paid a whole lot of money. I'm talking a whole lot of money, and it was like literally one of the worst weeks of my life.
It's not the happiest place on earth.
The only ride that she wanted to have anything to do with it was these teacups.
Oh.
And it was at MGM, so it wasn't like it wasn't at the Disney park. It was at I don't remember, but it was kind of like teacups. But for whatever reason, there was no line because it makes everyone else barf, I guess. But I literally rode those teacups like again and again and again. And all that was going on in my circular brain motion was, we paid this much for this? Like, what the heck? It was just so hard. But I knew, like, there's something unique about this because this kid won't even get off.
Yeah.
Like, she loved that. But didn't want to have anything to do with any of the other rides. So that's very interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. That's good stuff. This is awesome.
Oh, I'm glad you feel that way.
I don't want to. I feel like you could tell us like loads of stuff. I have lots of questions that I could come at you, but I don't want to miss anything that you have prepared. Do you have anything else that you think would be beneficial? I mean, the cool thing about you is that you know what we need. You know what I'm saying?
Or I'm figuring it out. I'm figuring out what I need.
Yeah.
And maybe that is.
Yeah, but how wonderful to go to a doctor who has the same like questions and needs and concerns and essentially children. Like, what a unique perspective that you offer.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's a great perspective. What are some other ways that trauma or chaotic upbringings manifest physically that we might recognize and say, oh, we need to go see PT or OT. Maybe this isn't what maybe even our doctors are saying it is, or ways that we could help. And so besides and also, this is two questions, but also besides, I like someone to walk away and go, man, I can do that. And it doesn't cost me any money.
Yeah.
Like, what can I do? Summer's coming up, spring's coming up. What can we do inside our house, outside let's just end with that. Can we end with that? Unless
Yeah.
you have something else. But what can we do right now that maybe costs little to no money, that we as parents can participate in some healing of this kind of stuff? You know what I mean?
You mean just physically?
Without
like
having to buy the ginormous thing I bought, which you can hang a tire swing from a tree.
Yeah. Well, so kids are totally motivated by play.
Yeah.
And play, which is interesting because I know that intellectually, but I hate to play.
I understand.
I don't. I don't
You
like.
are a driver.
Yeah, I don't like to get down on the
Yes.
floor and play. I volitionally have to take time to do that with my kids, right? I'm just.
Do you watch my
Yes.
episode on play where you set the timer? You can go back and watch the
Oh
episode.
yes, yes, and I'm like, I don't need timers for the kids.
Yeah.
I need timers for me.
Yeah.
But that is what drives growth and development for them.
Play.
Right?
Play.
Exactly. That's what they want. So it's that motivation to get that toy across the room that I want to play with it. So I'm
Yeah.
going to figure out how to move my body from here to there.
Okay.
Right. So different environments for kids help encourage different types of play. For example, in an orphanage, they play in the same room with the same kids and the same toys every day, all the time. Right. So their opportunity to be stimulated and curious about new things doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So being able to give a child opportunities to do new things and to play different games. One of the simplest things that parents can do that's great for kids with sensory issues and core, like abdominal weakness, things like that, is to get one of those simple little scooter boards. Do you know what I'm talking about? They have four little wheels on the bottom.
We had them when I taught PE. I
Yes,
used to teach PE.
because I put kids on their belly and then I have them crawl with their arms. They're doing reciprocal stuff with their arms. They're working on their abs and their back because they're kind of holding themselves up. You make it a game. You have to go down there and we've
Yeah.
got 5 bouncy balls,
Yeah.
zoom down there and zoom back. We're doing animal crawls, all different types of, okay, we're going to hop like a frog or we're going to crawl like a bear. All of those changes in opportunity engage different muscles for a kid, give them different ways to move their body. And we know that when moving our body integrates emotion and it integrates breath, and they have to take breaths a different way. And
Wow.
but then they're playing and they have no idea
they're doing it.
that they're doing any of those things. And in the meantime, you are connecting then to
With
your
them.
child. You know, it's like I say this always as a professional, and
Yeah.
it's much harder for me
Yeah.
to put into play. But one of the things I have done with Mia, for example, is that I love to do yoga. So I bought her own yoga mat, and we'll do even if I can only tolerate 3 minutes because
Yeah.
she kind of
Yeah.
might drive me crazy
Yeah.
asking questions or whatever.
Yeah.
She loves it. And I can get her to move her body in different ways, and she practices breathing. And so we're working on tools for her to cope with some of those really big feelings that she has not during a time when she has really big feelings.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
She's moving her body, she's getting stronger, she's doing something with me, and it's just me and her. And even if it's only for a few minutes, it's kind of working on all of the pieces, that really holistic part.
Yeah.
And the other thing is food. Being really conscientious about, especially for kids with nervous systems that are really, really wound up, things that are inflammatory, like sugars,
Yeah.
and like those are hard on a kid's
Yeah.
system, and they don't help regulate
Yeah.
things. So paying attention to those types
and
of
that's
things.
so hard because many of the kids that come to us, their diets were primarily sugar.
Right.
Whether that be a lack of education or financial reasons, or so
Right.
it's literally a weaning off and a retraining of the palate, really,
Absolutely.
which can be hard.
Yeah.
But yeah, I totally agree. I just, basically what you're saying, swimming, I'm sure.
It's awesome. One
Yeah.
of the very best things that
Yeah.
that they can do.
Yeah, swimming, trampolines.
Yep.
Trampolines. All these outdoor things that thank goodness during the pandemic we had a backyard.
Yeah.
Because some people don't, and some people are in apartments and parks are closed and
Right.
things like this. And I just always my heart. I don't know. I had a really tender place, still do, for people who do not have a space to get outside. Especially on a day like today.
Right.
It's just gorgeous here. Okay, so this is great. This is great. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Where could people reach you? Like, where can, if people want to reach out, if they're interested, do you do any kind of virtual work, or how does that work? Okay.
I do.
Okay.
And so, so I have a website
Okay.
because I have my own small practice,
Okay.
and I just treat out of my home, or
Okay.
I can treat via telehealth.
Yeah.
And that can be anywhere from, I can just have a phone conversation with someone,
Okay.
or we can do a full consultation. But you know, my scope and my lens is from a very holistic place.
Yeah.
So I can offer very specific things, like in terms of play and exercises and things like that. But I also I don't treat without integrating some of the other pieces. So knowing and understanding some of the backstory and how kids, helping a child integrate emotions, helping mom integrate emotions. Sometimes once mom gets re-regulated, which, okay, this is my life. Right?
Yeah.
Like when I'm regulated, she's much more regulated.
Yeah. For sure.
And so I'm spending a lot of work regulating me so that I can help her get regulated. But
yeah, that's good. It's true. Okay, so where can they reach you? Can you say, because what I'll do is you tell me, and then I will make sure it's in the show notes so someone can click on it, or either click on your website if you want your email, whatever you want.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so where can we contact you?
So the website is ptwellness.org.
Okay.
And if you go to that website, all of my contact information is there, and you can send me a message through there. And I'm happy to, I would always want to emphasize that you can always talk to me and ask me. I'm happy to share or think through something. It doesn't always have to involve this full out consultation of, you know what I mean?
So they can reach out to you.
Absolutely.
And you have boundaries to say, I can help you with that, or I can't.
Absolutely.
There
and
you
there
go.
are many
How
things
about
that
that?
I'm not the girl.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
And I'm very, very comfortable. And I feel like one of the things I do have is some understanding of the other resources that might be helpful.
Yeah.
So,
I do love
OTs
that
and
about
docs and,
Yeah.
play therapists. And, I mean, we have lots of those people in our lives.
Yes.
And I think it's important.
Community, right?
Very much
Which
so.
is what your book's going to be about.
Yeah.
And when do you think we can expect to see that book?
So my guess is that it will take me I probably plan to write for another 6 months because I'm still talking. I want other perspectives and I certainly know my own story, but
I don't know if we said this in this episode. Let me stop right here. So one of the things when I first met you is that you were writing a book about becoming an adoptive parent.
Yeah.
And so you were reaching out to me to potentially interview to talk about my perspective.
Yeah.
And so now that's what I'm asking her about the book. If you listen to the first episode, you know that. But anyway, so when can we expect the book?
Yeah, so I think my goal is to kind of write for another few months and talk to more people so that I have lots of perspective. I can share that when I started this book, it was very much from a hurtful place, right? A place that didn't feel as strong, and I feel like I'm gaining strength as I write. So it's evolving into a more hopeful place, but also being able to still tell the story that their trauma became mine in many, many ways, and that was really hard. It is really hard and painful, and I'm still working through that. I will always be working through that, but
Do you know any really cool people that don't work through stuff anymore?
I don't.
I don't either.
No.
All the cool people keep working through stuff.
I think that's what we're supposed to do, right?
Yeah.
We're supposed to continue to evolve.
I think so too.
I do feel like I'm happy that I'm not back where I was before, that I'm evolving at least to this point. But I think, so my goal is to be able to tell the perspectives of adoptive and foster parents, like the real stuff, the hard stuff, like how it affects your marriage and how it impacts your physical body and how it affects work and how it impacts your own self-work. And, but then also evolving into a place of everybody's journey is going to look different. But I think the core of this for me was that I needed to take a breath. I needed to come up for air, which is what I think I will probably title it. But that once you accept that and you're able to do that, and you take your own big deep breath, then you can start breathing into your kids and your family again. But I was suffocating for a little while and I needed to find my way through it. And so this isn't I'm not suggesting necessarily the specific way to get through it, more suggesting that it's possible, but you have to find your way to take a breath.
Yeah, that's good. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so
You're
much.
like my soul sister.
I believe that from the first moment I ever talked to you. I'm
so
super
good.
thankful to know you.
So good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for tuning in again. Again, if you didn't hear the first part of this 2-part series, make sure you go back to last week's episode and listen into the story of Jen and her husband Kyle and their adoption of 2 children from China who are such a huge gift to their family. And please subscribe, give a comment, leave a comment. You know, I have a website. It's mamaswell.com. There's a lot of resources on the website. There will soon to be trainings. But there's also blogs. So every one of these episodes has a blog that I've written. And a lot of times those blogs come from me going back and rewatching what we recorded. And you know what? I learned so much. It like sinks in for me. Like when I speak it, I hear it, I listen, I'm present. But then when I go back and I rewatch it, like it just kind of comes alive. And usually, as God would have it, circumstances have come between when I recorded and now that almost like really cement it for me. And so, you know, I'd love for you to hear those thoughts, and I'd love to hear your comments. I'd love to hear what's going on in your life. And under each one of those blogs, there's a place for comments. There's a place for conversation. You can always email me at tara@mamaswell.com. I love to hear from you. So until next time, and have a great week.
Mama's way.